Hiya, I'm Lily and today I'd like to introduce you to how we stamp onto vellum. Now vellum is a fantastic medium, and if you've not seen it before, it's basically a sort of translucent, almost like a paper, but it's a little bit different in terms of its properties to paper. Now it can be a little bit tricky to stamp onto. It's perfectly doable and I'm going to share with you today how we can do that. But we do just have to think about the sort of ink that we are using when we come to stamping onto vellum, as it is slightly shiny. So something like a pigment ink or a dye-based ink, which would dry perfectly fine on paper, wouldn't actually dry very well on our vellum. So we need to think about the sort of ink that we are using when we come to stamping onto vellum. But once we've mastered the ink pads that we need to use to stamp onto vellum, you really will be away, and it's a fantastic medium to stamp onto. You can get lots of different interesting effects. It's superb, for example, for use with flower stamps. If you're creating your own little stamped flower embellishments, it works really nicely as it gives an almost ethereal, sort of soft and delicate finish. So it's just something a little bit different to stamping onto paper like we do most of the time. And just like to share with you the ink pads that we're going to be using to do this. So what I've done is I've taken a piece of vellum. Now this is just white vellum. You can actually get printed vellums. There's all sorts of different types of vellums now available, which is really exciting because we can take a printed vellum and take it one step further by adding our own stamps to that already printed design to get your own custom vellums, which is really fantastic and really crafty and great fun to do. But in this instance, we're just going to stick with a bit of white vellum just to be able to see the image really clearly and to show what we're going to do to stamp onto just some normal vellum. So I've taken my vellum. I've also taken a rare earth stamp. Now this is slightly stained, it's very much well loved. It's a lovely stamp. It's from the Half Light Haven collection and it's this moth design. This would be perfect for creating embellishments for cards. You could even build up the design to create your own backgrounds, but I just thought the image would work really well onto vellum, as it could be cut out and used as an embellishment just for that subtle translucent effect rather than just stamping onto paper. I think sometimes as stampers we forget all the different surfaces that we can stamp onto. I think we get sort of drawn into just stamping onto cardstock, which is great and it's great fun, and there's lots of ways we can colour our images in and lots of different things we can do with our stamped images when they're done onto paper. But it's really fun to actually explore the different surfaces that we can stamp onto, as we can get lots of different effects and it can be really fun just to experiment. So that's what we're going to do today. So I'm just mounting my stamp onto my acrylic block. Now I'm using an acrylic block in this instance, but you could be using any sort of stamping platform. A load and fold would be perfect for this. I'm just choosing to use an acrylic block today. Given this is a clear stamp, it just clings to the acrylic block quite easily, and it's the same if you are using a stamping platform. You don't need any sort of adhesive to get your stamp to cling to the block. So that's really easy to do. Next, what we need to think about is the sort of ink pad that we're using. Now, what I've chosen to use today is a stays-on ink pad. Now, this is a solvent-based ink pad, and what that means is basically it's going to dry on the vellum, and we're not going to come back a few hours even later and touch the image and it's going to smudge. It will dry onto that vellum. It's fairly fast drying. It doesn't dry absolutely instantly, but it is pretty fast drying. And it dries on a range of different surfaces. Works for most surfaces really. So while it does work for your paper, it will also work for non-porous surfaces like your acetates, your vellums, even ceramic. So there's lots of different options you've got with your stays on. So if you're into a bit of mixed media, or if you just want to dabble with different surfaces with your card making, stays on is a really good ink pad to have. Now I've chosen jet black just so that the image will show up quite nicely onto the vellum for that contrast, but there are actually a range of different colours within the range of stays on, so that's definitely something to explore if you are thinking that you'd like to get into stamping on lots of different surfaces. Just comes with a little sort of plastic protector just to protect the ink pad, and as you can see it looks very much like one of your standard ink pads. We've got that raised felt surface there with the ink on that area, and try not to stick your finger in it as well. It will come off though, so don't worry about it. We're just going to ink up our stamp as we would with any ink pad, whether it be dye, pigment or solvent like it is in this case. So we're taking our ink pad to our stamp, gentle tapping all over the image just to get an even coat of ink all over that raised surface of the stamp. Once you're happy that you have got an even coat of ink, I would definitely recommend to put the lid on, just so you don't stick your elbow in the ink. And that's not speaking from experience. We're just going to turn our stamp over and just press down onto our vellum. As you can see, I've got a piece of white cardstock underneath, just so that I can see what I'm doing a little bit easier really. And just gentle pressure, firm, even pressure all over that image so that it transfers onto our vellum, just like so. And if I remove the white cardstock, you can see we've got that translucency of the vellum. We've got that stamped image on top. So if I place my hand underneath, you can see through it a little bit. Now it is slightly wet at the moment, so do take care. I wouldn't be sticking my finger in that just yet, but it will dry fairly quickly. And you'll see when the image is not so shiny anymore. So we could be colouring that in. The only thing I would say, when you are using vellum, if you add a lot of water to it, it does sort of wrinkle and warp quite a bit. So something like an alcohol pen, like your Lilly alcohol pens, is perfect for colouring onto vellum. You can colour on the reverse, that gives you quite nice effects, or you can colour on the same side. It's completely up to you. So that's using StazOn to stamp onto vellum. Just as a little aside, something else you can use when you are stamping onto your vellum is you can actually heat emboss onto vellum. So if you stamp using a pigment-based ink and then add some embossing powder over the top and heat set it using a heat gun, what you'll find is you'll get that embossed image onto vellum, which looks really, really good. However, one little thing that I would recommend if you are heat embossing onto vellum, make sure you do give a little swipe over with an anti-static bag before doing so, as vellum can just be quite static. And you don't want those stray pieces of embossing powder where you don't want them. But that's stamping using StazOn onto vellum, a really fun technique, and I hope you get stuck in and have a go at that because I think you'll really enjoy it.